book people? Welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be showing you all of the books that I will accept zero criticism on. These are my top favorite books, 4 to 5 stars, generally 5, and I keep them on my shelf of all of my favorite reads. I have about 16 books to show you today. Some of them I bet are probably going to maybe not upset, but might stir up some people because I know that some of these are a little bit controversial in terms of what people think of them, but this is my opinion and these are the books that I love and the books that I've had the best experiences with, and I really just want to share them because then you can get to know me more as a reader as I start to make more videos. And I just want to remind that I do have an Instagram account and I do use Goodreads as well. So I will tag everything in the description of this video. My Instagram has a little bit more stuff about what I'm actively reading and probably books that I buy and whatnot, even though I'm on a book buying ban right now, but I assume I'll probably post that on there. And yeah, I'll also probably post updates about when I will be uploading videos. So I think it's probably a safe bet to follow my Instagram. And Goodreads is just for fun if you want to see my reading journey a little bit closer, because I do update quite often on Goodreads. I wanted to share these with you because I just had such a good time with them. And I say I won't accept criticism on them, but obviously everyone is entitled to their own opinion. But I will probably argue a little bit if someone were to say, oh, I hated that book, and I'm like, why? And they don't have a good reason. But obviously, every book has flaws. I don't know why I'm going on about this. I don't need to be going on about this. Anyway, I'm gonna just get into it now and start showing you the books. I also do not remember what I have rated each of these independently, but I do know that majority of these are 5 stars. I think some are 4 stars. I can't remember which. But it's safe to say that these are all of my highest rated reads. The first books that I want to show you are actually a duology, and that is Vicious and Vengeful. I read these over the summer last year, and there is something about these books that I have just never experienced before. Vicious in particular was just, it opened up a whole new world of what a book could be for me. And I personally love V.E. Schwab. There's another book on my little list here that is V.E. Schwab. And there's something about the way that she writes her books that just blows me away. From what I understand, the point of her writing this book was that she wanted to write villains with no redeeming qualities, which at least this is what I've heard. I don't know if that is fact, but I heard it and I think it's fact. But there is something about this that it just, you find yourself questioning why you want to excuse the behavior of some of the characters, even though you know that they're doing bad things. And I just really, really love that. So the book follows 2 characters, Victor and Eli, and in this world there are people called EOs, which I think are extraordinaries. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. I read this last summer, so I can't really remember, but they want to research for one of their classes. I think it's like their thesis or whatever, like a big project. What happens during near-death experiences and if people can get certain powers from them having a near-death experience. And so this book just sort of follows them doing very extreme things to try and prove that you can get these powers. So they end up sort of going head-to-head at some point, and this book just sort of follows what happens after they have an interesting eye-opening experience during their sort of trials for what they're researching. I don't want to give anything away for this video. I don't want to be giving spoilers for any of the books, so I'm going to be pretty general with how much information I give. But I love Victor so much. Victor is one of my favorite fictional characters in the whole world. Reading this duology was so fun because of how much I love Victor, and I will never shut up about him. He is just my favorite ever, and he's not exactly the greatest guy. Like he does a lot of bad things, but there's just something about him that I love. So now for Vengeful, it is a continuation of Vicious, and there are just some new characters that are introduced, and the reason that I'm lumping it in with this one is just because I love the books so much. I'm pretty sure that I was a little bit more underwhelmed with this one, but I definitely still enjoyed it. And it's one of those books that just, these two are books that just really suck you in when you read them. And I had such a hard time putting them both down. So I just wanted to include this because it's, you know, an extension of Vicious. But Vicious was definitely my favorite of the two. The next book is The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, which, I mean, I'm pretty sure everyone has heard of this book. And if they haven't, they've probably heard reference to it. I feel like it's pretty common. I mean, I've seen a lot of people reading it and talking about it. This was so tragic to read. I read it at a time where I could really connect with and relate to Esther. So this was just a really emotional journey for me, and I felt like it was made even more interesting because I know that it was written so, well, not so long ago, but long enough ago that while I was reading it, I was like, wow, this does not strike me as the type of thing that would be coming out in a time like that. But it did. And I thought it was just really amazing to find my own struggles in words by someone who is so articulate and poetic and has such an influence. I read it and I felt very seen, which I think a lot of people probably feel the same way when they read it. So this was kind of a bit of a life-changing one for me. There are definitely things in this to be criticized based on the times, but other than that, I think that this is just a really, really solid and very emotional book that, honestly, I think everyone could get something out of reading this. It really is just, it's great all around. The next book I'm going to show you is the one that I would say is probably the most controversial on this list. I know some people hate this book, like absolutely hate it, and that's okay, but I don't. That's a Little Life. Where do I begin? This was such a journey. This was it emotionally taxing? Yes. Did it take up a whole lot of time? Yes. Do I still think about it every day? Yes. This was so beautiful. And I can understand people's arguments about it just sort of being so over the top with grief. How far can these characters be pushed? How many terrible things can they experience before they break? Which, you know, I can understand why people think that that's wrong. Why people think, you know, why did you write a book like that? That doesn't make sense. It's not enjoyable. I felt so connected to every single character in this book. And I really, really thoroughly enjoyed the journey. I laughed a whole lot. I cried a whole lot. I cried in public places, which was a little bit embarrassing. But this is something completely unmatched in my opinion. This is the only reading experience I've had where I felt so fully immersed in the world, and I would talk about the book to my friends and, you know, my partner, and I'd be like telling them what's going on, and it would feel like I was just talking about people that I knew, which is something that is really special in a book where you can feel like you know the characters even though they're people on paper. So this was just a really special reading experience for me, and actually very soon after I finished it, I was fortunate enough to go to New York and be able to see Lispenard Street and the apartment, so that was really cool. Bittersweet, of course, because I wasn't reading the book anymore, but very, very cool. So yeah, this book is just horrible and so sad, and I would never recommend it to anybody, but it's so beautiful and such a journey, and there is something about this that, as I said, I've never felt like this with any other book. And I know a lot of people feel the same way, but there are also a lot of people that really hate it. So I wanted to just include this because this is probably one of my top reads ever. The next two books I'm going to show you are by the same author, but I'll go one after the other rather than what I did for Vicious and Vengeful, where I showed you them at the same time. But my favorite author in the whole world that I think I've talked about in both of my videos prior is Gillian Flynn. And Sharp Objects, 5 stars. Honestly, there is something about this book that just can't be topped. I think it's a great mystery. It's a little bit gross, a little bit disturbing, gritty. These are how I like my thriller mysteries, where they are, as I said, gritty. Gillian Flynn has a way of writing where the characters are unlikable, but also you still root for them anyway. I don't find Camille Preaker to be all that, like, great of a character in terms of, like, she's not very nice. She's troubled, but she's so fun to follow. And Sharp Objects was a book that I read very quick, and as soon as I put it down, I wanted to throw up. I don't know if that's a normal reaction to this book, but this was my second Gillian Flynn book. The first one I read is what I'll show you next. But this will go down as probably one of my favorite books ever. And it will most likely stay that way because I just haven't found anything that really matches up to it. And so it's about this woman, Camille Preaker, who she has moved away from her hometown. And she works as a journalist, and she is told to go back to her hometown because there has been 2 disappearances of young girls. And so she starts investigating, and things unfold from there. And she starts to sort of relive her own past, living in that town and experiencing the things she did while investigating, which I think is really great when you can overlay one story with another. And that is done, in my opinion, very successfully here. And I also had no idea who the perpetrator was, which was so cool because I was just like jaw dropped by the end of it. So this is just one of the most 5-star, maybe 6-star if I could give it, books out there for me. And in the same vein, Dark Places by Gillian Flynn, which is still one of my favorite books, but I reread it recently and the ending really disappointed me, which is probably why I couldn't remember what happened at the end. I still think, regardless of the ending, that this is also just an amazing book. Like Sharp Objects, it's gritty, it's dark, and it is what I think is a properly done thriller. It's very disturbing, which, if I'm reading a thriller, I hope it's disturbing, because I've read some thrillers that feel very light. This is like a well-rounded thriller, in my opinion. Our main character, Libby Day, is the sole survivor of the massacre of her family that is said to have been committed by her brother. But the book follows Libby sort of investigating and trying to figure out if it really was her brother. And it also goes back in time. So there's 2 separate timelines where you're going forward with Libby trying to figure out what happened, and you're sort of going back in time from her brother's perspective and sometimes her mom's perspective, as Ben, her brother, sort of builds up towards when the murder happens. Which is not to say that's not a spoiler. He is just sort of it's going about his life and seeing how, the world around the Day family sort of builds to the massacre that happened. So I thought it was a really interesting book and creepy and dark, which, is kind of my thing. So this is another, I think it's a 4-star. I think I rated it 4 stars, but still one of my favorites. I don't know if I can show this cover. I'm assuming I can, and if I can't, whatever. Acts of Desperation was another book that I read last year. I actually bought it in New York the same trip that I saw Lispenard Street. And this was a really interesting book because I felt it was very relatable. It is about a woman she's in sort of a toxic relationship with, I think, her husband. I think they're married. And it's just sort of following a woman that is breaking down a little bit and realizing that, maybe what she's going through isn't necessarily what she wants, but she's vying for this, I think her husband, she's vying for her husband's attention in some way. So it's kind of sad, but it's also a very interesting piece just about, the female experience, which a couple on this list do sort of fall into that category. I'm pretty sure I rated this a 4 stars as well, but I can't remember. I don't think I had necessarily a big problem with it. I think that it was just, I finished it and it wasn't, that 5-star feeling, but it's still one of my favorites. I don't have a ton to say because if I'm being totally honest, I don't remember this too much. There are some very stark scenes in my head that I remember, but obviously those are spoilers and I can't really go into those. But this, I just felt so much while reading it. I remember that. And I really connected with the main character that we follow. So that's Acts of Desperation by Megan Nolan. Mayfly by CJ Leede, I think is how you say that, was crazy. I mean, if you've read this, you probably know. But I picked this up and I was going solely off of the fact that I had heard it called a gender-bent American Psycho, which I haven't actually read American Psycho, but I have seen the movie. I own the book, I just haven't gotten around to it yet. And yeah, this was a whole lot. I was reading it and I was cringing and just kind of going, what the fuck? But still, really awesome read. I haven't gotten into a whole bunch of like proper extreme horror in terms of like gory books. So this was like one of the first ones that kind of fit that bill. And I had such a fun time with it. I thought that the main character is, she works as like a Disney princess, but it's sort of like off-brand Disney princess at Disneyland. And so she does that, and then on the side, she's like a murderer, I think. Does she just murder people? I can't remember if she just like goes off and murders people, but she definitely has a lot of really crazy thoughts. Like, she is thinking stuff, and I was reading it, and I was like, girl, no. I don't think so. It was very, very disturbing and very gross, but I thought it was really fun. So I said, you know, she works as a Disney princess, and then she meets this guy who sort of, I guess in a way, like, she just finds sort of, like, intriguing, but also really annoying. I'm pretty sure at the beginning she's like, oh, this guy is so annoying. And so they kind of have this relationship that just spirals and goes from there. So that's Mayfly. In that same sort of genre, I have How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. This took me entirely by surprise. I rated this a 5 stars, and I was really not expecting that. I went into it saying, okay, I have read one Grady Hendrix book, which was this Final Girl Support Group, I think that's what it's called. So I had read that, and this was my second Grady Hendrix book. And I was going into it not really expecting much. I just wanted to read something that was, you know, kind of spooky and fun. But this blew my mind a little bit. I don't know. It really blew my mind when I finished it, but in hindsight, I'm like, yeah, it was good. Like, it was really good, but I don't know if it, like, totally changed my life. But it follows this brother and sister. Well, it mainly follows a sister, and their parents have passed away, and they have to sort of, like, clear out the house and sell it, or that's what they want to do. So she's fighting with her brother about what they want to do with the house and what they want to do with all of the belongings, and so it's sort of a battle between them. And then inside the house, their mother had this crazy like doll collection and like puppets and things, and so our main character, our protagonist, finds all of it really disturbing. But there is one puppet in particular named Pupkin that causes a bunch of trouble, and it is about them and their experiences in the house with all of the dolls and puppets. So if you don't like dolls, I would not recommend this one. I had no idea what this was about going into it. I just knew that it was going to be sort of a haunted house, and I feel like I got a whole lot more than I bargained for when I picked this up, which is fine because I really liked it. But there were some pretty disturbing things in this that had me sort of like covering my eyes while reading the book, which a little unnecessary, but I did do it because I was like, oh, that's terrible. So it was really fun. So I did mention that I will have some more V.E. Schwab on this list, and this is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This book was one I read, I think, 2 or 3 years ago now, and this was really when I started getting into reading again, so maybe 4 at this point. And I didn't really know how to annotate, or like, well, not that I didn't know how to annotate, but I did not know how to put in tabs properly. So these are like very, very long, and yeah. So this is a book that I almost can't even put into words when I want to say how I feel about it, because this is such a special book to me. I found it a little slow in the beginning, but I kept reading, and I am so glad I did, because this is just one of the most beautiful things I've ever read in my entire life. And I know some people find this book really slow, and they just find it hard to get through, and so they don't like it. But this is such an emotional book, and I just had such a great and emotional time reading it. So it follows Addie LaRue, who makes a deal with, I think, the devil to, I don't know if it's to have immortality or to live forever. I think it's something in that vein. I haven't read it for like 4 years. And so she ends up being able to live forever, but cannot be remembered by anybody that she meets ever. So she could be having a conversation with someone, and as soon as they turn their back on her, they will not remember her if they were to look at her again. So she cannot leave a mark on anything whatsoever until she walks into a bookstore one day, and there's someone working there that remembers her. So it goes from there. And it's just got so many amazing parts to it. The writing is beautiful, and the characters are great, and the story is just really interesting. And I found so much of it just so helpful to me at the time. I read a lot of books that sort of emotionally affect me, and I read them at times where I think I need to be emotionally affected because of the state that I'm in. And I remember reading this, I wasn't necessarily in the greatest place, but this was just very uplifting for me for some reason. It's a pretty long book, but not too long. It's definitely manageable. I have read longer books, and I don't think, and I've said this about other books on this list, but obviously that's why we're here. I don't think that this book can necessarily be matched by anything. I have not found anything to top this. So this is just one of, when I say this is one of my favorites, I mean it to the highest extent. When someone asks me, what is one of your favorite books? What is your favorite book? I will most likely be saying The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, because it was just actually life-changing. I think this one might be another controversial one, but I also don't know. I think the movie might be more controversial just because of one of the actors, but the book is Call Me By Your Name by Andrea Seaman. There is something about this book and the feeling when I read it, or the feeling when I watch the movie, that just makes my heart ache. I don't know what was put in this book when it was written, but it is just absolute bittersweet heartache. And I plan to read it again this summer. I did just rewatch the movie. It is so beautiful, and it is such an interesting love story. And yeah, I know it's an age gap romance, which, yes, there are issues with that, definitely. But putting that aside, I think it is such an interesting read, because you do see, the difference in the way that Elio and Oliver act because of their age difference, and the way that affects their relationship. I think that the fact that they are only together for such a short span of time, and then they part, is what makes this the hardest thing. And you know it from the beginning, because you know that Oliver's only staying in Italy with them for a certain amount of time. So the love is very short and very intense and just very beautiful. And this is a book that I don't think I have really felt the same. I have not felt the same way about a book when reading than I do when I read this one. This is a very specific feeling, and I really need to go back and read it, because that feeling is one that I need to feel again. Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov is, I think, another controversial book, because people sort of misunderstand it. And it is misunderstood because it is a satire, and I think some people just don't get that. If you have no interest in reading it and you don't really care that it's a satire, and you're just like, well, that's gross, then that's okay. That's your opinion, and you don't have to read it. Something really great about books is that you can pick and choose what you read. So the reason I read this has to actually do with another book on this list, but I am very glad I did, because it was, dare I say, a fun experience. It was gross, and it definitely took some years off my life to read, but I thought that it was very, I don't want to say charming, but definitely sort of like funny. And, you know, Humbert Humbert is kind of witty. And the way that he rationalizes his decisions and the way that he goes about his relationship with Dolores is just sort of, I don't know. It was enjoyable, but I was definitely sort of like, I don't know, like, oh, that's gross the whole time. So, I don't know. I would say read at your own risk, definitely, but this is just, you're not going to find something like this out there that does that sort of topic the way that this one does. Because again, it's a satire. So it's kind of funny. There are moments in this book where I was laughing out loud because of the way that Humbert Humbert, he sometimes breaks the fourth wall. And I didn't expect that. And there's just like one moment in this in particular. I'm not going to share because it's way towards the end. But he says, and then I did this. Except you thought that I would do that. I didn't actually, but you thought I would, and that's kind of funny. So, yeah, Lolita is disturbing, but still a little bit entertaining. Not a little bit entertaining. It's pretty entertaining, but it is disturbing. And yeah, my one piece of advice going into this is just read at your own risk, because even though it's a satire, it can still make you uncomfortable. That's kind of the point. Acts of Service by Lillian Fishman is something that I went into similarly to How to Sell a Haunted House. I didn't really know what it was about, and I think I got a little bit more than I bargained for, which again, totally okay. I like when books surprise me. But this was such a thinking book, and I think it really put a lot of things into perspective for me in a way, just about relationships and the way that we view relationships, and how sometimes for some people monogamy can be a little bit detrimental, which is, you know, okay, not everyone is built for that. But this follows a character named Eve, who she is in a relationship with her girlfriend, and, you know, they are, you know, just like an average couple. Eve sort of realizes that there might be more that she wants, and so she posts some photos, and somebody comes across them, another woman comes across them, and they meet, and she gets drawn into this sort of, I don't want to say weird threesome so as to say that threesomes are weird. That's not what I mean. But a weird threesome in the way that the other two people that she is involving herself with are weird, and so the threesome becomes weird. But she gets involved with these people, and it just ends up getting a lot darker than she expects it to, because she wants to be with this girl, but this girl is with a guy, and the guy is sort of just, she finds him very, I want to say like charismatic. She's very drawn to this man, and so is the other lady. I can't remember their names, so I'm just gonna say like lady, man, whatever, because I can't remember their names. But they are both sort of having this competition, like vying for his attention, even though technically the guy and the girl are like dating. So it's a really interesting dynamic between the three of them, and Eve is sort of like exploring that and trying to figure out what she wants herself. So it's a pretty good read, and I think I rated it 4 stars rather than a 5, but I really enjoyed it, and it was a super quick read. And also the atmosphere of this book I really loved. The way that it's written, I really fell into this one. It was great. Bunny by Mona Awad is a pretty popular one on BookTok, BookTube, Bookstagram, whatever. And I think it's popular for a good reason. I read it and was very, very surprised. I didn't know a whole lot going into it. A lot of these I didn't know a whole lot going into them. I really like to go into books without much background information, because I think it makes for a better reading experience when you just sort of go in blind and see what happens. And this was one that I picked up just because I had heard about it a lot, you know, on social media. And usually that doesn't pay off very well, but I found that this really did. It's great because it really explores group dynamics in a school setting, and how people just get so cliquey. And this takes it to the extreme, because there is this clique of girls, the bunnies, who are doing some pretty intense things. I don't want to say a whole lot. I feel like it's better to just go into it blind. But basically there's a main character, Samantha, who she starts out really hating the bunnies and thinking they're, you know, like awful. And then she gets invited to one of their smut salons. And things go from there. And it really is just a huge downward spiral for Samantha. There is a point in this book where Samantha sort of wakes up and she is very different. And I was reading it and I was like, this is so jarring to read. And I feel like I can totally understand what Samantha's feeling right now. So it was very cool. But I'll save talking about it too much because I know that a lot of people already have talked about it on the internet. Boy Parts by Eliza Clark, who I believe wrote Penance as well. I have not read that, but I know that she wrote it. And this was so fun. I want to write a little paper about it for school because there is so much in this book that I think about on a daily basis almost. This book follows a woman who does photography sort of as like a side gig, I think, and she takes pictures of boys, but she doesn't really care about how old they are, and it's very like degrading pictures of these guys. And she finds this one guy that she is just completely entranced with and wants to take pictures of, and it just sort of spirals. Again, this is another book that I don't want to say too much about in case you do pick it up, because there is just so many layers and so much happening in this book that you kind of just need to go in blind. But it's disturbing. It's dark, and it's another one of those main characters that you just think, like, she is awful. She sucks. And yet I am hanging on to every single word because I need to know what happens next. So this is probably a book that I will reread this year. Even though I read it last year in the summer, I feel like this is another one that I just need to pick up again. And this is something I picked up on a whim. I don't think I heard about it from anybody. I just saw it at a bookstore and went, you know what? I think that that's what I need. So, you know, if anything, definitely try it if you like sort of, I would say this is weird girl literature, like peak weird girl literature, in my opinion. So I definitely recommend this, but I do say just be careful with it because, you know, dark, disturbing content, not everyone's going to hold up too well to that. And finally, the last book that I have on my list, My Dark Vanessa. This is another one that I read, I think, about 3 years ago, and it crushed me. This was one of my most memorable 5-star reads, along with The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. This is the reason that I read Lolita. If you've read it, you know why. And I read this when I was the same age as the main character. There is something about that I will never be able to get back. There is something about that I will never be able to experience again. And I am so grateful that I did, because when I say it changed my life, I really mean it. I saw some of myself in Vanessa, and that was terrifying to read. I thought that this was so profound, and I haven't read a book quite like it since, and I would like to reread it this year because it's been so long. I think my experience with it will be a little different because I'm older now, but there was something about reading it while being, I think she's 16 or 15. 15. So I read this when I was 15. So it was a while ago. There's something about being able to read this while I was 15 that just, it changed my perspective on books as well, because there is something about connecting with a character so deeply like that just, it doesn't happen super often. So I was kind of lucky, honestly. This follows a character named Vanessa who, when she's 15, finds herself in a bit of a love affair. I don't even want to call it that, but with her teacher. And it also follows a second timeline of Vanessa as an adult, and just sort of maybe not coming to terms with, but the way that it explores how she goes about her life after those events way in the future and how they still impact her daily life. And something happens to the teacher when she is older, and it's just, she sort of like has to relive a whole lot of what she went through to cope. So yeah, this is a reading experience that I would love to be able to go back and just have that experience again. I read it in 2 days. It was very, very quick for me at the time, and I don't think that a book has really affected me as much as this one has. I definitely carry it with me every single day. Not the book, literally, the reading experience, how it changed me. I carry that with me every day. And I got my best friend to read it, and she felt very similarly to me about it. So it wasn't just me. I think that this is a book that just very much so affects people. So that was my favorite books ever that I will accept little to no criticism on, because some of them, sure, we can all criticize a little bit, but for the most part, I will accept no criticism on. And I hope you really enjoyed my list. I hope that, you can find some new reads through this list, and that if you've read some of them, you enjoy them as well. And if you have read some of them, you can let me know down below in the comments. And if you haven't and you want to read some of them, you can also let me know that in the comments, because I'd love to hear what you're interested in reading. So thank you for joining me today, and if you would like to continue to join me on my reading journey, you can subscribe, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!